So we're going to talk about school refusal and disengagement in complex kids. So the first thing I want you to think about is, what do you think is most important to understand about students and about the students and families you support? I could tell you a lot of things, but take a minute to think for yourself based on your lens and your perspective. What do you wish those families understood better? What do you wish the parents of the kids you support understood better? And what are some of the things that may make it difficult to support these families in navigating the dynamics that they're facing with their complex kids? And I want to clarify, when I say complex kids, and I'm really talking about children, teens, or young adults, I use the term complex to describe those kids who are struggling with some aspects of life, learning, behavior, or social issues. Sometimes they're going to have a diagnosis or multiple diagnoses. Sometimes they're not. But those kids who are developmentally not hitting the same milestones with their neurotypical peers, that's really who we're talking about in this conversation. And you may hear yourself thinking, why is it so hard for them to go to school? Why are they not coming to school? All they have to do is get up and go. Or maybe you're thinking, this kid is so smart. Why don't they just do their homework? Why don't they just turn it in? What is it that's keeping this kid from really reaching their potential, because you can see the potential so clearly? Sometimes you may be wondering if they're ever going to make it. Are they going to make it to graduation? Are they going to make it in life? Like this kid who's got so much potential, are they going to be able to find their path and to thrive in life? And these days, there's a lot of us who are wondering, are we ever going to get him off those screens? I remember my kid coming home and confessing to me that he was in a class at school and he was reading whatever he was reading on his iPad underneath the desk, right? What do we need to do to help them learn to navigate their relationship with screens and technology? So what I think we've all come to understand in recent years, particularly in the wake of a global pandemic, is that empowering these complex kids to become independent is shockingly complicated. It's probably more complicated than any of us ever imagined it might be. There's the layer upon layer upon layer that's compounding to make life more complicated for them and for the adults who are supporting them. And this is true at any stage of development. So this is true for children under the age of 10, for preteens and teens, and it's very true these days for young adults as well, kids all the way up into their 20s and 30s who are struggling to find the path to their own success. So what are some of the most common challenges that you're seeing with students? We're talking school refusal, right? So what are we seeing? What are the challenges that are facing kids and facing educators and facing providers? Well, one of the things we know for sure is sometimes these kids stand in their own way, right? They are avoiding responsibilities. They're engaging in all kinds of risky behaviors. And we're seeing this at younger and younger ages. They're engaging in all kinds of what we might call intensities, emotional dysregulation, sensitivity issues, oppositional issues, all kinds of intense behaviors. And there's a prevailing energy of disconnection and mistrust that's happening with these kids. I often say to parents that we have fallen out of trust with them. They have fallen out of trust with us. And very often they've fallen out of trust with themselves as well. So these are the ways in which they stand in their own way. And as a result, more and more students are refusing to attend school at all. And we're seeing this again at the youngest of ages. I'm now hearing from parents talking about 6-year-olds who are saying, I'm not going today, I won't go. And that was something that was really unprecedented a number of years ago, but now is much more commonplace. They're refusing to do the schoolwork. They are, again, reacting in all kinds of intense ways. You're seeing more bullying, more arguments, more pushing back to teachers, more physical violence, more impulsive reactivity that may look like violence, but is often not actually violent behavior, but is a dysregulation that kids are experiencing. They're avoiding all kinds of responsibilities at school and at home. They're engaging in power struggles. We're going to talk about that a lot later. They're underachieving. They're not reaching their potential. They're not coming anywhere near reaching what we understand they have the capacity to reach. And they're very, very often hyper-focusing on distracting behaviors. Maybe they're avoiding, maybe they're seeking input, stimulation, and actually success in other arenas. And so as adults in their lives, we see each of these behaviors. But what we're beginning to understand is that we're often seeing these behaviors out of context. And it's that lack of context that's preventing us from problem solving effectively to work with these kids to achieve success. If we're only approaching one problem or one behavior and we're not seeing the web or the lens that's pulling them all together, we're actually problem solving to what I might say is the wrong problem, or we're problem solving to a solution when we're not really understanding what are leading to those challenges in the first place. So we're going to ask you to ask the question, we call it we go. What is really going on? What is going on? And when we ask that question, we begin to see that the behaviors we're objecting to or struggling with or trying to redirect are actually a response to something underneath. And what we begin to learn with these complex kids is that the behavior on the surface that may be driving us crazy is actually not the problem. And we're very often trying to solve a problem that's not really getting to the core of the issue. And so when we look at what's underneath, the behaviors are a response to perfectionism, to kids who are saying to us, I'd rather not do it than do it wrong, who are experiencing perfectionism from the adults in their lives and see that as the only way to perform. They're avoiding fear, pain, their fear of failure, fear of success, fear of not knowing. A lot of our kids, when we look at kids who are in high school years preparing to move on to college, university, or whatever they're likely to do after graduating, they have an expectation of what that might look like that creates an avoidance that we see as procrastination, or we may see it as they don't really care, when in fact what may be happening is they're avoiding something because they have a fear about what will be expected of them on the other side. We're also seeing these behaviors that are a response to irritability, excitability or irritability. I think a lot of times we don't recognize the extent to which what's happening in the larger world is influencing how these kids are feeling on a daily basis. And this is for kids of all ages. And when they're looking at a world where they don't understand whether there's going to be food security, whether there's going to be planet health and safety, whether there's school health and safety, that creates this low level of agitation for them that nobody's really conscious is there, but it's constantly kind of nagging at them, almost like a thorn in their side. The behaviors are a response to unmanaged triggers. A lot of our kids, and we'll talk about this later in this conversation, have challenges with emotional regulation, and they are reactive to what's happening instead of being responsive because they don't have a good, strong sense of what their emotions are and how to effectively manage their emotions either before a trigger happens, when it's happening, or after it's happening. So there's a lot of ways that we could be doing a better job of helping kids understand what's upsetting them in the first place. That trigger, we often say the trigger happens in the gap between expectation and reality. And for a lot of our kids, when something doesn't meet the expectation as they saw something was going to happen, the reality is different for them. It's that in between, that's when they're starting to get irritation. A lot of our kids are feeling out of control. The world feels out of control. Maybe the parents or the adults in their worlds are more controlling or directive or authoritative or authoritarian. And they're feeling like there's a lot of expected of them and they don't have a voice. And at some point, not having a voice has them begin to become either reactive or avoidant, because that out of control is a disempowering way to be. Kids are struggling with low self-esteem, low self-concept. A lot of our kids are isolated. They don't know how to be socially adept. The pandemic for many, many kids has interfered with typical development in that arena. For kids of all ages, we're now seeing 4- and 5-year-old children who are struggling with anxiety and depression in new ways. And the expectation is that they weren't properly socialized when they were infants and toddlers. And leading to a kind of isolation. And we're seeing that not just with little kids, but with elementary age kids and kids all the way through the spectrum. Different kinds of isolation. The isolation from social media, while it can be a phenomenal connector, it can also be a phenomenal disconnector. And minimal opportunities for social engagement can reinforce that isolation. I spoke to this a little earlier. Some of these behaviors, there's disconnection and mistrust. Our kids don't trust us. Sometimes, often, we don't trust them. And very often, they don't trust themselves. And that triangle becomes a really difficult dynamic for us to move through. As a result, often our kids are feeling disempowered. And frighteningly, there's a lot more hopelessness that's happening amongst younger generations now than in previous years. So what's underlying all of those behaviors? And I think you'll begin to see a theme is that when we see what's happening on the surface, we want to look underneath it to see what might be causing that, and then underneath it to see what might be causing that. And at Impact, we work with thousands of parents and professionals all over the world. And we've been doing this for over a dozen years. And what we've begun to see is some patterns and some clear ways to identify what's beneath some of those behaviors that I just mentioned. And for today's purposes, we're going to talk about four things that are underlying these challenging behaviors. Lagging skills, particularly in the area of executive function, stress and overwhelm, fundamental power conflicts, and communication and trust issues. So we're going to go through each of these individually and sort of drill in a little bit more.